What's the scariest true story you've heard or told? I had brain surgery roughly 3 years ago. I lost my concept of time. What felt like 4 months was only 3 days. The amount of physical, mental, and emotional pain I went through was crazy. I had to find all of my memories and relearn how to walk, talk, everything. If you want to go through something terrifying, that is it. This happened with my sister-in-law. When she was about 11 or 12. Her and her family lived in a trailer park. Just down the street was her bus stop for school. Each morning, she would see a man in his trailer taking pictures of her and her friends. It creeped her out, so she went to tell her mom, my mother-in-law, of what this guy was doing and how he would just stand in the window staring at them and taking pictures. So, her mom calls the police and report him. The police didn't do anything. This went on for about another 2 weeks with no action from the police, to where now my sister-in-law is terrified to stand and wait for the school bus, and her mom had to call the police again. This time, the police actually arrived at this pervert's house, and lo and behold, the police find a wall covered in pictures of my sister-in-law, some of the other neighborhood little girls, and some child PRN. Her and the other families watched from afar with this guy cuffed up and being escorted to the police cruiser. Off the main road of a place I used to work at, a guy decided to climb under a bus to hitch a free ride. Well, the bus went over a speed bump and the guy fell and ended up getting caught on the back wheel. His body was dragged 5 blocks before the bus driver realized what was happening. Police officer who came into our store regularly told us that the guy was still alive when they got to him, but died an hour later. He said his whole back was scarred off, exposing his spine. I remember driving down that road after the fact, and you could still see a deep red blood-stained trail going on for those 5 blocks. Absolutely horrifying. Short story. My wife is from Enterprise. And I guess a kid in her school got beheaded on his way home. Was literally found with his head cut off on the side of the street, and to this day no one knows who did it or how it happened. Absolutely gives me chills. When I was much younger, we lived across the street from a big family. He had a wife and 5 sons. And one night he brought his whole family into the living room and lined them up and pulled a shotgun out from under the couch and shot himself in the head. The kids were messed up again for the rest of their lives. One of our employees fell into the hammer box. This is a device filled with ultra high torque rotating hammers used to grind up large appliances into scrap metal. It apparently turned 3 times before the emergency shutoff was hit, pulling in half the employee's body at a diagonal running from the middle of his pelvis to his shoulder. The gruesome part was that he was still alive, as the pressure from the hammers was holding the enormous wound shut. Took 30 minutes for EMTs to arrive while he screamed for them to simply turn the machine back on and end it. He didn't make it. A kid from a couple towns away from me lived on a farm with his girlfriend. They were in the kitchen one night. She was cooking and him and his friend were cleaning their guns at the table. His went off and shot her, killing her immediately. He then loaded up, ran outside and shot himself in the head. One day as a kid I was exploring the forests near our house with my cousin. The forest was on a hill, but there were several craters there because of bombs that were dropped there during the World Wars, Germany. One day we saw a backpack at the bottom of one. We tried to climb down, but it was kinda steep and slippery, so we didn't want to risk falling. We planned on returning later with a rope, and went home. The next day news story was that there was a backpack found with the remains of a girl in that forest. A guy walking his dog found it. After the dog wouldn't stop barking and going crazy at the edge of the crater, while staring at the backpack, we stopped exploring the forests after. Edit. Walking my dog and crossing the street with a green light and a guy blows through the red light and almost hits me and the dog. I yell asshole and he slams on his brakes and turns around and pulls into parking lot ahead of me. I get closer and see the car has Illinois plates. I live in PA. He says careful who call asshole, I've killed people. I just keep walking and he drives away. The next day I hear spree killer Andrew Cunanan used a stolen credit card at a gas station in my town. 100% was him. I called the asshole. This week in Cologne. From the wall next to Autobahn. A concrete plate fell down into ongoing traffic and hit one car, killing the driver. After the inspection, they found another 6 plates that weren't properly constructed, just like the one that fell down. The story of John Edward Jones getting stuck in Nutty Putty Cave in Utah. He became wedged in the tight crawl when he took a wrong turn in the cave system. Rescuers could do nothing to get him out and he was stuck in there for 28 hours before he died from cardiac arrest because feet were above his head and his heart was pumping overtime. One of the rescuers even gave him a phone to call his wife and talk to his young daughter before he died. One of my dad's friend's wife was murdered by some crazy dude walking down the street. This guy had just been released from a mental hospital and literally just stabbed her as she walked home. When my dad's friend came back he thought she had just taken the dogs out for a walk, so he walked along the normal walk route and he saw loads of blue lights. My mother never taught me to swim because when she was a teenager she saw a friend get sucked into a whirlpool at the bottom of a drainage lake that is the deepest body of water within a few hundred miles of us. They didn't find his body for days. When I was young, I saw a documentary about a guy who got flesh-eating bacteria in his nasal cavity. It ate his face and he's still alive. Eventually they removed the bacteria by removing the eaten parts of his face. He got a prosthetic face, which back in those days was basically a plastic Halloween mask that tried to look human. At the end of the documentary, he took the mask off. His face from his forehead down to his mouth was just a hole. Edit. It was a fungus, not bacteria. I think the story of Tina Fey getting the scare on her face is super ed up. She was a kid just sitting and playing in her front yard when a random guy pulled up, got out of his car and slashed her face for no reason with a razor. WTF. I was in the drunk tank with a guy who beat another man to death. The guy didn't die immediately. Was in intensive care for 3 days and died in the hospital. The man who killed him told me specific details about it, and on the 3rd day, when the guy in IC died, the COs came in the cell and put him in isolation across the hall. They left him in general pop until the guy actually died, and once he was officially charged with capital murder then they took him out of our cell. I was 17 at the time. Never forget being scared to fall asleep right next to this dude. When I was a kid we lived on a large acreage. One night we came home late and as we entered the driveway we noticed a car pulled over down the road against the ditch that bordered our property. We saw 2 people. One of them climbing out of the ditch. When we parked my mom told my dad to go see if they were okay or needed help. My dad said that they looked to be okay and it was probably not a good idea, so we all went in and to bed. The next morning we were woken up by the police. They had our whole yard taped off because some horseback riders had noticed a leg sticking out of a black plastic bag in the ditch exactly where that car was parked. That look on my mom's face I'll never forget. We know for sure my dad wouldn't have made it back home alive if he had listened to my mom that night. When I worked in healthcare I had a patient who got a sinus infection. He stopped taking his antibiotics after a few days because he felt better. His sinus infection came back with a vengeance. When he got to the emergency department he was presenting with stroke symptoms. The infection had spread to his cranial cavity. There was so much pus that it was twisting his brain. No one thought he would survive the surgery. The family was advised to expect the worst. Amazingly he actually survived. He ended up needing 3 more surgeries to wash out and spent almost 2 months in the hospital. Take your full dose of antibiotics, people. I had an associate that was a fireman. He had to go find the head of his brother-in-law after a car accident. Then he had to console his sister when she heard. Tough bloke. Can you imagine that being your day? When I was about 8 years old our school was doing swimming lessons as part of the curriculum. My mum worked late, so we went to after school care and didn't get home until after dark. When we got home mum asked me to take my wet togs, bathing suit, and towel out to the clothesline to dry so I could use them the next day. I was so confident going outside to do this and had this real feeling of being a big kid. I walked into our backyard only for a man to be running at me. I screamed, jumped inside and instinctively locked the back door as I did so. As this was happening, my mum told me she heard the guy jump the gate which was next to her bedroom just after she heard me scream and came running to find me. I slept with the light on until I was 16 and I get my husband to go outside for me while it's dark. Lived W3 other girls sophomore year of college. All 3 took off early for spring break, leaving me alone in the house. First night alone, I heard someone bang on my front door at 2 AM. Then I hear more knocks at the back door. A man yells "Boulder police. Open the door." When I didn't, I heard body slams against both doors. Soon I hear "Little girl, open the door. We know you're alone." At this point I'm so scared I keep accidentally dialing 611 instead of 911. When I eventually do get the police, cars roll up, thankfully, just minutes later. Officers have 4 boys from our school hockey team face down on the grass. I had to file restraining orders against them and the kicker, one lived across the street from me and we'd never spoken a single word before then. I am not sure I remember all the details correctly, but anyway. A guy was cleaning a giant cooking tank at a tuna factory. It was so big that he had to climb all the way in. Someone else didn't check and protocol was broken along the way somewhere. Second guy locked the barrel and turned it on, cooking the guy inside alive. Same idea. There was 2 men who got caught in a bread oven conveyor while doing maintenance and got stuck and ended up being baked alive. One survived all the way till the end and died on the floor. One died inside. Lockout procedures exist for these exact reasons. My friends and I were drinking one night and going around asking, "Hey, whatever happened to?" In this case, a guy a few of us used to have an aid period with in high school. Nice kid. Googled him. I've found a few sad results playing this game in the past, and there were a couple appellate court decisions visible in first few results. Turns out he went to Afghanistan. Got extremely geared up in combat. Court notes said he saw things there that completely undid him. Basically, and came home with PTSD and delusional schizophrenia. And home. He apparently has been on a mission to kill his mother to save her from demons and send her to heaven. He's tried and failed numerous times. Apparently. It's not just that B plot though. It's all the surround. We looked up his social media accounts then and it's just threads and threads of manic rambling about demons. It was sad to find this, and not the only time I've found a former classmate lost his or her mind. Unfortunately. Common but also terrifying to think you could be normal. Then through one set of circumstances or another, become completely insane within a few years. I was in class in 10th grade and the teacher was asking everyone how their weekend was. The quietest girl in the class spoke and while breaking down in tears said she was on a trip in the mountains with her mom. They made a stop for some reason and she looked over the cliff and saw an overturned vehicle with a dead family scattered about. Co-worker's dad was babysitting his baby boy for him. At one point, Granddad went into the nursery to check on the baby and found that he'd somehow reached for the window blind strap and tangled himself up in it to the point where he was choking. Baby was already blue and all of the veins in his face had popped. Grandpa frantically dialed 911. EMS was there in 2-3 minutes and they brought the little fellow back to life and he's okay now. Edit. Wow, you guys really blew this up overnight for me. For the parents here freaking out. Really? Check to see how close to the crib any hanging cords like this are. And they brought the little guy to the hospital. They separated and questioned the parents and grandpa over and over like they were suspected of doing this on purpose. Of course. It got sorted out as a true accident. The child is now in his 20s and all is well with him. I wouldn't say it's the scariest one I know, but it was pretty close to home. I got a call from my dad asking if I was okay about half an hour after it happened. Recently a guy at my university was doing construction on a new building. Basically there were 3 dudes standing on a big glass roof thing that was supposed to be stable. Long story short, it wasn't. They fell right through the thing. 2 guys got out okay. But it was a 20-something temp worker who ended up getting killed because of it. I mean, that's combining falling to your death with getting lacerated to death. Awful way to go. Back in the 70s. Some friends and I planned a camping trip to Northern Cali for a long weekend. We packed up and headed north on the highway. Somewhere around Bakersfield we picked up a hitchhiker headed to Kernville, who we dropped off before heading further north. So we get to our campsite and start getting things set up. My GF finds a note tucked into the top of her backpack. It read, "I could have killed all of you. None of us slept that night. Maybe he was just warning you against picking up random hitchhikers." Last year, there was a girl named Ruth who went to University of Illinois Chicago. She was heading out from an event and was catcalled by a man who followed her into a parking garage. He killed and up-hid her, then just left her there. She went to a high school near me and it breaks my heart to recall the story. Edit. Few years ago, I worked at a bar near a forested area. One day, it was like 10 PM and some random kid comes running and screaming and saying my mommy and daddy are trying to kill me. Shortly after, a woman and a man enter the bar, presumably his parents. They ask me if I saw where their son went. I said no and they exit, uttering to themselves. I call the police and they come like 13 minutes later. They search the area for the parents and take the kid with them. And that's all I remember. Edit. I was robbed at gunpoint in front of my house. He had the gun pressed into the back of my head. He took my money and jewelry and took off. He was arrested an hour later. There have been several confirmed cases in a few different countries of people living in other people's houses unbeknownst to them. I believe one case went on for a couple of years. The intruder would wait until the homeowner would go to work and then sneak out and steal small amounts of food as not to be noticed. Well, eventually the homeowner did notice and couldn't figure out where his food was going. So he set up a hidden camera to record it. I can only imagine how scary it would have been to come home from work one night and sit down to watch the video, skipping through hours of stillness, to suddenly come across a person crawling out of your attic, and then the slow realization that that person is still in your house at that moment, and then the retroactive fear of thinking back to all the times you laid awake at night and heard a noise, which you just dismissed as coming from the pipes or the old wooden beams. But actually it was a lying person just above you. It gives me the heebie-jeebies every time I think about it. This thread is probably dead now. But when I was about 4 and my brother 11, we stayed at my aunt's between moving house. A neighbor had a son my brother's age. So my bro used to go play with him on weekends, etc. One day my brother goes over after lunch. The dad opens the door. Says the kids and mum are out shopping, but come on in and have some juice and tell him about how the move is going. My bro goes in, has a drink and a chat, then comes back to my aunt's after no more than an hour. A few days later police are all over the place. Turns out the dad murdered his wife and kids, and was in the middle of burying them in the back garden around the time my brother knocked. Crazy to think what could be different if my brother had visited a couple of hours before. Caught that guy on an off day. After reading these, back when I was a lot stupider than I am now, I briefly dated a guy a work friend had introduced me to. We enjoyed each other's company and ended up in bed, and honestly, it was some of the best sex I'd ever had. A couple days later, he calls my job and leaves a message with the receptionist. "I want nothing to do with you. Leave me alone. And never call me again." Which was weird, since I never did call him. But I figured, oh, well, his loss. A couple weeks later, police found a girl stuffed in a well the next town over. She'd been beheaded. Not long after that, they arrested the guy I had dated oh so briefly. He pleaded guilty. His reason for killing her? She wouldn't sleep with him. A friend moved to Argentina a few years ago to teach for 1 year. She decided to save money by renting the cheapest place she could find. Turns out the cheapest place in Buenos Aires is also the most dangerous. On the first day there, she looks out the window just as a guy runs up to another guy on the street and shoots him in the head before running off. She found a new place the next day. This happened to my wife's friend. So one evening she was driving home from work in a quiet area when an unmarked police car speeded up behind her and started flashing his blues and signaling for her to pull over. To this day she doesn't know why, but felt something wasn't right. After a call to her boyfriend, he gave her a contact number for our local police station. She rang the number and asked about an unmarked police car wanting to pull her over. The person on the phone did a quick check, or possibly contacted a dispatcher, I don't remember. What they told her was to keep driving but stay calm. Full stop. Within a few minutes 4 marked cars came speeding up behind, and before she knew what was happening, boxed the unmarked car in and forced it to stop. The dispatcher told her to drive around the corner and stop. As it turned out, this guy was being hunted by police for pretending to be an officer to get young women to pull over, where he at gunpoint RPs them. My mom's best friend was murdered by a man because she broke up with him. Leaving an abusive person is the most dangerous time of the entire relationship because the abuser is about to lose all control. That's why it's not as simple as I would just leave. Tell him her to off and just go. No. You need a secret plan, friends to help, and a secret destination. Hence why abuser's first step is usually to isolate you from your support network and cut off access to your money. It requires a lot of planning and help to escape. And even then it's incredibly dangerous. I had the most likable stepfather at the time. Treat me really well. We would rent movies and plenty of nice activities for a 10-year-old boy. Until he cheated on my pregnant mother and she broke up. He threatened her. But from what I recall, she didn't took it too seriously. He waited for us one night hiding in our apartment. Luckily for me, I had stayed at my grandmother's place to sleep. He tied her up, RP'd and killed her. The baby did not survive. During trial he said he would have killed me too. After years I got more details of Ed's stuff he had done. Like being abusive mentally and physically. But I couldn't see it as a kid. Didn't have contact with him for 17 years. From what I heard, he got out of prison a couple of months ago. I have no idea if he still want me dead or not. I want to move out to somewhere else. I've been living in the same neighborhood all my life, but can't afford it right now. So I'm trying to be extremely careful and hoping for the best. I had 2 incidents in school that I still don't understand. I would have been year 9/10. So about 14/15 years old. The first one. I was walking out the school gates when this huge man who I didn't know stopped me and asked, "Do you know Mental Hamster?" To which I quickly answered no. And went on to my school bus home. I never found out why someone was asking after me. The second occasion. Someone phoned up the school reception saying that they were waiting on road nearby to take me to the dentist. I didn't go because I knew that I didn't have an appointment booked. Again. I have no idea what it was about. A week after my wife's sister, we'll call her Jane, 35, gave birth. She was at her house and her mother-in-law, we'll call her Betty, was staying with her while her husband was at work. Jane passed away in her bed a week after giving birth. After the funeral, everyone gathered at my house. Betty is a pretty heavy drinker and got pretty drunk at the gathering. She proceeded to tell me and my mother about the day Jane passed. She said the baby was crying and she checked on Jean in bed. Betty said that she saw Jean shaking and babbling, but her eyes were closed. So Betty thought that Jean was having a bad dream. Betty went and took a shower. Another hour goes by and the baby started crying again. So Betty went to check on Jane again. But Jane was dead by then. I've never told my wife or brother-in-law what Betty told me. And I don't plan to.